this module we will discuss purposes, insights and approaches towards scenario development. Let's first have a look at what scenarios are. Scenarios start from an initial state and evolve into a final state. Important is to first fix a time horizon before starting developing scenarios. Scenarios are hypothetical, describing alternative futures and possible pathways through these by reflecting how they can emerge from the present. Alternative futures are also called snapshots. Scenarios describe dynamic processes, which consist of states, driving forces, events, consequences and actions, which are causally related over a period of time. Scenarios do not aim to predict nor to forecast, but rather to project the future. Why should we develop scenarios? The purpose of scenarios is to systematically explore, create and test possible future conditions, both desirable and undesirable. Scenarios can help generate long-term policies, strategies and plans, which help to bring desired and likely future circumstances in closer alignment by outlining important milestones along the way. They enable policy and decision makers to grasp the long-term requirements for sustained advantage, growth and avoidance of problems by developing adaptive strategies. Here we see a few approaches towards scenario development. One way of describing approaches is the normative versus exploratory approach. Normative scenarios start with preliminary view of a possible future and look backwards to see if and how this might or might not grow out of the present. Exploratory scenarios, on the other hand, start with the present and starting points and move forward to the future by asking what-if questions about implications of possible events outside familiar trends. Another way of looking at scenarios is the inductive versus deductive approach. In inductive approaches, one builds step by step on the data available and allows the structure of the scenarios to emerge by itself. The deductive approach attempts to infer an overall framework to start with, after which pieces of data are fitted into the framework. Another way of looking at different approaches towards scenarios is presented in this figure. Approach A is about structured scenario construction, B intuitive scenario construction, C combined scenario construction and D scenario construction using distributed intelligence. Each of these approaches use 5 steps. Within this presentation we will focus on approach A and D. Approach D is about scenarios using distributed intelligence. Here we see a case on mini-scenarios for the future state of higher education in Europe. The project was developed in the context of the Romanian project on quality and leadership in higher education. As a basis for the scenarios developed in this project, issues on the future state of higher education by 2025 were assessed online by research managers of universities and also researchers from universities. They were assessed based on 2 dimensions. The first dimension was the probability and likelihood of the issue to take place by 2025. The second dimension was the relevance of the issue for universities to act upon it today. By plotting the issues on their probability and relevance, we see here that in the left upper corner the issues appear with the highest probability and the highest relevance for universities to act upon them today. They all together construct the likely scenario. Depending on the content, you can also define a name for the scenario, with here the name the global university was chosen. Mapping the issues in another way, by for instance in a horizontal axis using standard deviation of probability, and in vertical axis still the mean of relevance, we see that issues come up that are relevant but are highly debated among the stakeholders who assessed the issues. They composed therefore a debated scenario. Another example of devising scenarios we see in this case on IMS 2025, a project on intelligent manufacturing systems by 2025. The input for the scenario development was based on interviews and survey results, which was in turn based on a literature review. The process consisted of a workshop and online commenting. The workshop was based on priorities identified to decide a skeleton of scenarios. Smaller groups defined alternative routes to each scenario, and a final element was description of scenarios, which was open for commenting online. Here we see a list of impact dimensions that were relevant for the project. They were assessed with regard to the snapshots by 2025. The impact dimensions have a high level of detail. They can be grouped into bigger main dimensions, such as policy and governance or international industrial R&D cooperation. Those bigger dimensions were used then to build a framework. For instance, we see on the vertical main axis policy and governance on the positive and the negative side. On the horizontal main axis we see industrial international R&D collaboration on the negative and the positive side. In order to have more possibilities, two more axes were introduced relating to knowledge society and environmental sustainability. Based on this framework, a few snapshots were identified among all those snapshots that were possible. Here you have 16 possibilities. Out of this, those were identified which were most interesting to discuss. Those are not necessarily the most positive ones. For the workshop, the likelihood and desirability of each snapshot feature become a reality by 2020 on a scale 1 to 3 was assessed. The workshop also had the following main elements. Special attention was given to most desired futures, which is a desirability of 3, with a high degree of becoming a reality, a likelihood of more than 2. The discussion was then based on the selected features and their interrelations. Mind mapping was used to organize the discussion, and then the IMS Vision 2020 was summarized by defining 3 main statements. A final step was a detailed description of all features and their interrelationships.